So let's see how these use cases stacked up with the Tempo Digital Archive. The first one was all about protecting the raw footage, and I love this story. Basically, when Monica Lewinsky scandal came out for Bill Clinton, it happened 2 years after the actual incident occurred. So all the news organizations were scrambling. It's like, can we find footage? They must have been together at some point. Well, they were together at one point, and it was just during some kind of speaking engagement that Bill had, and there was like a meet and greet in the crowd, and he probably shook hands with 100 people, and among them was Monica, and he gave her a nice big hug. Well, we all know that picture and this one because they ended up on the cover of Time magazine. Well, CNN had actually stored all their raw footage and indexed it in a way that they could actually recover it, so they were able to find this. So that's a jewel. But my point here is when you have raw footage, even if the project you think at hand is completed, you want to save all that because you never know what you're going to do. And that's the industry trend, is the whole idea is to restore everything, archive everything, even though you'll only restore a little. So be prepared. And to do that, you need a very inexpensive media like tape to be able to just use that raw footage when you need it. So why did they choose a Tempo, or what made a Tempo special for this? Is most archive solutions out there, when you do the archive, they'll leave a stub file, a little kind of pointer to the archive file, or they'll delete the original. Well, that really wasn't going to work in this case because the editors are going to still be using the files, you know. So they, with the Tempo Digital Archive, they were able to set up some criteria that every night they would look for raw footage in a particular directory, maybe a particular type. I'm not sure how they did it exactly, but they were able to automate the process of making sure that was archived and still retained on this isolon. Furthermore, with the Tempo Digital Archive, it archives in TAR format. It does it in kind of proprietary format, so that was really important to them. So this meant that their content was protected and preserved as soon as it entered the workflow. So how does this look? How does this look? First, you upload the raw footage to the primary storage, in this case the isolon, and you immediately archive it to the deep archive, and it still stays there on the isolon for the editors to use. The second use case, this is when I talked about how the editors were having to bother the archivist to retrieve every little thing, and with 70 editors, it was too much work. Well, in a lot of environments, you have your guru, and that's this archivist. And yes, it's an important role, and they need to make sure that everything is architected properly, but they really don't need to be bothered every time you want to retrieve a project. So they felt like the human in the loop was inefficient, and the vast majority of archive products out there had nothing that allowed editors to easily retrieve things themselves. So with the Tempo Digital Archive, what they saw was this user interface shown here on the screen. On the left side, you'll see like a file system with the local files there, and on the right is the archive structure, which can be nested and hierarchical, so they can drag and drop from the file system over to the archive. And it made it easy for them to do. They didn't have to bother people to do this. So this gave them faster and more direct archive and retrieval. And it's also an area that most products don't cover, even some of the bigger ones. So what does this look like? First, the editor brings up the UI on their screen. It can be either Mac or Windows. It runs on both. And they archive the file to, say, the nearline, or maybe to the deep archive. It depends on how people set things up, or maybe both together. And we have a use case where you can archive to both at the same time and keep it on the nearline only for 6 months. You set up a task so that it goes and searches for things that need to be liberated from the nearline and only kept in the deep. And then when they go to retrieve it, the Tempo Digital Archive will find it from the right location. So then the editor can just retrieve it, a different editor can retrieve it from the nearline if it's there, otherwise the deep archive. The third and last use case is really my favorite, and it's because it's all about what I call self-cleaning storage. So how many of you work in an office where there's an office refrigerator? I do. And I sometimes bring my lunch and I put it in the refrigerator, and sometimes my friends say, hey, let's go to lunch, and so I go out to lunch instead, and that lunch stays in the refrigerator, and I forget about it, and then somebody else piles in there, and pretty soon that refrigerator is full of everybody's stuff, and nobody cleans it out unless that poor administrative assistant has to do it. Well, this is kind of how their Isilon shared storage was, where editors were dropping things and no one was cleaning up. So with the Atempo Digital Archive, they were able to set up a task, a scheduled task that would go into that shared area, and anything that was, I think, 6 months old, last access date was more than 6 months, it was automatically deleted completely from the Isilon, but it was saved in that archive just in case. And if somebody needed it, they could go into the archive and bring it back by dragging and dropping that way. And what makes this Atempo different than the other solutions is, a lot of other solutions, when they archive, they'll leave a stub file, which is great if you want the file to stay there, but if you're trying to get rid of clutter, because this is duplicated stuff, you really don't want the stubs there. So what this enabled them to do is really maximize their storage and only use it for what was really important. So what does this look like? The editors are exchanging their files. The storage is getting cluttered. There's an automated task that goes and does the cleanup. I wish I had this for the refrigerator at my office. And then it archives it off to tape and removes it completely from the Isilon. But if somebody wants it back, they can get it back. So those are just 3 interesting use cases, and I love them because they're not ones we made up. These came from real life stories. There are actually 3 more, and I'm not going to go into them today. But if you want to hear a few more, the next one I'm not talking about is how we integrated with Final Cut Server so that people could have a commodity solution that anyone could use, and how we use non-proprietary formats for a very large historical preservation project, and also how we can set up multi-tier archives. So not multi-tier storage necessarily, but multi-tier, like, you know, your original disk plus the nearline disk plus the long-term tape. So the way to hear about the other 3 use cases is to come by the Atempo booth